Hello and welcome back to The Hatch. I'm Sammy Roth.
And I'm Rosie Murphy, and this is the podcast where we talk about Lost.
We are going to be watching Season 5, Episode 2, The Lie, a Hurley-centric episode.
And we've got more from our interview with Damon Lindelof, one of the creators of the show.
Yeah, following up part 2 from our conversation with Damon last week.
Let's get started.
We start each episode of The Hatch with our hot takes about that week's episode. Rosie, what's your hot take about The Lie?
Oh gosh, a lot happens in this episode. Lots of
happens.
Like little funny moments. So I sort of have two hot takes. One thing I thought was hilarious, and one thing I thought was like a little too much, maybe. Okay. The thing I think is hilarious is there's a shot where one scene ends. It's the scene where Jack is taking care of Saeed in the hospital. It's very intense, and then we just cut to an in the microwave shot of a Hot Pocket being heated up, which I just thought was extremely funny. And then, of course, Ben is in Hurley's house, and Hurley like throws the Hot Pocket. My genuine hot take, though, is the final scene where we meet Eloise Hawking in her underground chamber where the pendulum is swinging. She's wearing this cloak, and it's just like it's a lot. It felt a little heavy-handed. I get that Ms. Hawking is like a paragon of mystery and that she's going to be extremely important in this season.
Nice use of paragon of mystery.
Did she have to be wearing the hood and the cloak? She gets to do a reveal at the end when Ben comes to see her or whatever, but I just thought it was like a little too much.
Interesting.
Making her into, shadowy figure.
I loved that shit. I was eating that up so bad. Oh my god. I loved everything about that scene.
Fair enough.
She's an international woman of mystery.
Indeed.
So I actually have some other thoughts on that scene, but I want to put a pin in it for just a minute because my hot take, we really ought to like compare our hot takes beforehand because my hot take is also just about how hilarious this episode is. I swear to God, I was writing notes like, oh, this was pretty funny and that was really funny. And by the end of it, it's like, oh shit, I've got like 15 different notes on things that made me laugh this episode. In this otherwise, like very intense, like there's flaming arrows flying and, Hurley is getting arrested for murder and, all this, really intense shit's going down. And they just, I wonder who wrote this episode because whoever wrote The Lie, I gotta look this up. But no, so I was, I wrote down many of them and I'll spare you and our listeners my entire, it was Eddie Kitsis and Adam Horowitz, two of the regulars. I'll spare you my entire list of funny lines, but just a couple. Actually, but one of them's kind of awful. They're both pretty awful, but I have to admit these things made me laugh incredibly hard. One was when we get the introduction of young Charles Widmore in the Jones outfit, which one I think is amazing, an amazing way to introduce young Charles Widmore, even though we don't know it yet. But when he says,
"I want you to tell me everything or I'll cut off her other hand."
What?
Other? The first one isn't negotiable. It's just to illustrate how serious I am.
No.
I know that's, this is kind of awful, but I was laughing so hard at that just because I'm thinking like, wow, this kid, this young snot-nosed Charles Widmore kid is so full of himself. He's such a punk. Like, the first one's not negotiable. It's just to illustrate how serious I am. Like, what an asshole. Oh man. So I was laughing really hard at that. And it previews so well who this guy is going to become, the classic movie villain, as you referred to him last week. And the other one that I loved was just the fact that they gave Neil Frogert like his first actual semi-prominent role in Lost and made him super, super annoying only so that they could then kill him in like the most shocking and gruesome way possible when he gets hit with a flaming arrow and his full body catches on fire. Like, just the fact that they did that to him and put him in the episode for that reason, I was just laughing so hard.
I mean, that's such a classic, like, red shirt treatment of a character, right? It's like, oh, we're going to name and nickname this character for the first time so that we can kill them and so that they're, not just an extra. It's what happens to Arzt way back in season 1. Although
you're right. It's exactly the same as Arzt.
Exactly what happens to Arzt. Although, I mean, that's like a few episodes, but same idea. Yep.
No, that's such a good. You're right, and they make you so frustrated with him, so that when it happens, like it's horrible, but it's also kind of funny, and that seems to be the intention.
Yeah, I don't know if I'd go so far as to say it was funny.
Well, I was laughing.
But yeah, it certainly, you know, sets the scene off.
Anyway, there were a lot of laugh lines this episode, and maybe more of them will come up. But that was what stood out to me here.
There really were, and I love it when they write in Hurley's parents because they're such a great like Greek chorus. Like they're involved enough that like Hurley shares a lot of detail with them, and they, you know, kind of see what he's going through up close, and their reactions are exactly what the viewers' reactions are, which are like, excuse me, what? What's happening here? Like, you know, when Hurley's dad has to take Saeed to see Jack and he drives past the officers and he goes, hello, officers, even though he's in the car. It's all like extremely relatable. And of course he watches Expose, which is such a sweet little Easter egg.
It is. Watches Expose after making like a decadent lunch for himself. He's just living the life out there with Hurley's lottery winnings. Like
deeply relatable.
Yeah. It is. No, the description of them as a Greek chorus I like a lot.
Sure thing.
Anyway, lots of other stuff happened this episode.
Yeah, where do you want to start?
Well, I don't know if you want to just dive right in here, but the title of the episode is The Lie, and I think that, you know, talking about Hurley's discomfort with this lie and you know, why he's so unhappy about it and what it might have been like, you know, like if they hadn't done it, I think that would be a ripe area for discussion.
Absolutely, it would. So the scene that we get here on the Searcher, the boat that they're all on immediately after having been picked up by Penny, this is an immediate continuation of a scene that we get at the end of season 4, right?
Right.
Where they're all sitting on the boat and Jack is the one sort of rallying the group and saying, we have to lie. And I think what we find out here that's new is that Hurley really did not want to do that. And it's kind of haunted Hurley ever since. Everybody else seems to have bought into it pretty quickly, including like Frank Lapidus, who's like, yeah, whatever, you know, I'll go with whatever you guys plan. But yeah, what we see here that's new is Hurley's reticence to be a part of this little scheme.
Yeah, and I found myself asking, and I think I don't know if it's quite an immediate continuation. I think it looks like a couple of days have passed and they've probably been talking about this, but I don't know, I guess I just found myself wondering why is Hurley so uncomfortable with it? And is it just that he's, you know, such a good and pure person that he, you know, just doesn't like the idea of lying, or is there something else going on that's motivating him? I don't know that I have a really good other answer, but I'm interested in it.
I like that question a lot.
I mean, clearly he feels it very deeply. I mean, when he says to Saeed, you know, the whole...
You know what, dude? I'm gonna remember this. And someday you're gonna need my help, and I'm telling you right now. You're not getting it.
I almost was surprised Hurley had that in him, that intensity of, you know, to tell Saeed, you know, this is going to come back to haunt you.
Yeah.
He feels it very deeply.
I mean, I think both of those options you presented could be true. I mean, one, that Hurley is just a sort of good guy who doesn't want to lie and doesn't want to deal with the complexities of like structuring his whole life around this lie. Like, I think one of the things that has to have been really difficult about this is like the need to always be on alert because everyone's going to want to talk about the plane crash all the time, and the need to keep reinforcing it, and the thought that like for other people involved here, the stakes are really high. Like for Kate, the stakes are really high because she has to go through the trial that we've already seen and she has Aaron to worry about. Whereas Hurley is just kind of like going back into this life that he wasn't exactly loving anyway. And now it's this sort of great burden that he has to bear.
No, I think that's definitely true, that this is, you know, why he's, you know, in the place he is mentally. And I like that idea that he, unlike the others, maybe he doesn't have something to gain from this. I mean, Kate's an obvious one. Saeed probably just wants to be able to focus on, you know, reconnecting with Nadia and moving forward and not having to dwell on the past.
Right.
Jack's got, you know, terrible regrets about having left people behind on the island and, you know, his role in not being able to save everybody.
Right. And Sun, I think, just wants to get home and have her baby and, like, deal with the loss of Jin.
Right.
which is also, like, side note, that scene between her and Kate where she says, "Oh, I don't blame you, Kate. You did what you had to do." It sure sounds like she blames Kate, though.
Yeah, the fact that she brought that up at all and put Kate through, like, reliving, like, remember how you were supposed to save Jin, but didn't? Well, I don't blame you for that.
By the way, I know you were just doing what you had to do. But let's talk about it for a little while. It's so manipulative.
I had the same reaction that you did.
Yeah. Sun is sort of trying to start her own little bit of machinations here, but we can leave that aside for now. Yeah, I think that makes sense. Like, everybody else sort of had something to gain by lying, even if it was just going back to quote unquote normal life. And Hurley really, I mean, when Hurley crashed on the island, he was living with the idea that he was cursed, you know? Like, I don't know that he felt like he had anything to come back to, and he just sort of ended up where he did at the end of season 4 and became one of the Oceanic Six. That's just how it happened.
For sure. It is, I mean, it is very touching, obviously, when he tells the truth to his mom, and his mom, even though it sounds absolutely nuts, says she believes him. Like, it's,
it really
there's nice
is.
resolution, but it's like, you can, I mean, it definitely, you can see watching this episode, like, hey, this is exactly what he was afraid of. Like, this is why he didn't, I mean, he didn't want to live this life the last 3 years.
Yeah, and I think an element of what happens in that scene where he tells his mom, and it, it's written in a way that's sort of designed to be funny. Like, it all comes spilling out in this way that sounds, absurd because it is.
Another funny moment. Yeah.
Tells him that she believes him. I mean, it's super profound, but that telling someone else, like, breaking the circle of trust, kind of changes what Hurley owes to the others. And I think one of the things that's really intense here is Hurley feeling like, oh gosh, like, I owe so much to Sayid and to Jack, and, like, I have to, when they come to visit me, I have to see them, and when they come to pick me up and take me out of here, I have to believe them. And, like, it's like we're in this little mafia together because we share this secret. It's this bond that he maybe doesn't really want to have to these people.
Interesting.
And yet he does. And when he tells the secret, I think it kind of breaks that bond a little bit. Is that anything?
Yeah, I think that's interesting. I mean, it makes me think of the moment later in the episode when, when Ben tells him, come with me, this is going to be fine, we're going to get you back to the island, and you're not going to have to lie. And Hurley obviously listens to Sayid's advice from the previous episode and basically, tells Ben to go fuck himself and runs in the other direction and gets himself arrested by, and, by the way, another funny moment, Hurley yelling, I killed them all.
However many there were.
Hard not to laugh at that. But, I mean, what your comment makes me think is that another way to interpret that scene, besides just, Hurley having a reaction to Ben, is, Ben is standing there saying, very believably and ultimately truthfully saying, I'm here because Jack sent me for you. Jack knows you're here. This is your friend. Jack and Sayid, want me to come and get you. How could you say no to that? So maybe another way to think about this is, in addition to Hurley rejecting Ben, it's rejecting the idea that he has to do something just because, Jack and Sayid want him to.
Right.
If it doesn't feel right to him.
Yeah, I think that is something.
I mean, another thought that I had that's related to this is just the question of the people they left behind on the island. I was watching this episode and actually feeling a bit of surprise of, gee, they've been off the island for 3 years and they have all of this, guilt or regret about, and they're trying to protect the people they left behind, right? I mean, that's the point of the lie, to protect the people we left behind.
From Charles Widmore.
As far as I can tell, they haven't made any efforts to find the island themselves or to go and rescue the people they left behind.
No, I mean, I think the intention was that they were never coming back. Like, I think...
Right, but I'm surprised by it, especially watching this episode where, in Hurley's, ideal reality, they came out and told the truth and, everyone, was informed. We landed on this crazy island and there were these other people called the Others and all of the stuff that he, spiels to his mom. And presumably in that scenario, I mean, part of the point of telling people the truth, I would think, although maybe I'm wrong, would be to, try to get some sort of effort going around, locating the island and rescuing those people. Kind of like we see, in Dharmaville later this season in 1977, Sawyer, Miles, Jin, et cetera, Juliet have spent 3 years, meticulously combing the island, quadrant by quadrant, looking for their friends.
Yeah.
In the hopes that they might still be there. And meanwhile, off the island, they, they just seem to have taken on this attitude of, they're gone, and the best we can do is to make sure nobody else finds them, which I'm kind of surprised by, frankly. Especially in Hurley's case.
I see what you're saying. I don't think I agree.
Okay.
Just because, what could they have done? I mean, Charles Widmore is portrayed as this ridiculously powerful man. He can stage a plane crash on the bottom of the ocean. He can hire this whole team to go find this island. And even he was not fully successful. The freighter team made it to the island, but the only one who made it off was Lapidus. If even he can't do it with all of his resources, then, what's Hurley gonna do? What's Kate gonna... these people...
You're gonna go find Daniel Faraday's mother. Who they don't know about.
Who they don't know. Desmond is going to do that. But I don't know. I think it probably seems, and they saw it vanish, from up in a helicopter. They literally saw it disappear.
True. As Hurley says in this episode, bloop.
Yeah, I mean that's what happened. And I think if I were in that place, I would also be like, well, it might still be out there in space time, somewhere, but I don't even know where to begin. I'm sure they have been... Hurley obviously has been sort of tortured by thoughts of what happened. I think they all have, both in terms of what they personally lost and what they were witness to and what they did. But how would you possibly find the island?
But I guess I just, when I heard Hurley in that first scene talking about, if we told the same story and stuck together, they'd have to believe us. I guess I felt like what must have been on his mind there was, and then, that would enable us to go back and save our friends. But I could be wrong about that.
Yeah, I mean, maybe. I didn't necessarily pick up on that. I think he just didn't want the added burden of having to stick to this story that wasn't true.
We have a hot take from a listener that we didn't play earlier, but I think this would be a good moment when we're talking about returning to the island and motivations for doing that to share a hot take that we got from our listener, Michael.
Hi, this is Michael from Charleston, South Carolina, and I am calling to leave my hot take about some of the discussions that y'all had on the last episode, which I love, by the way. I've been listening almost from the beginning of the podcast. I think this is the first time I've called in, but I'm not sure. Anyway, I disagree that bringing the Oceanic Six back to the island is only the Man in Black's plan and nothing else. I think that Jacob wants this as well. He brought them there originally to become the island's guardians, after all. And the Man in Black might be the active agent bringing all this about, but that doesn't mean it's all him and no other destiny or mystical aspect. I like to think of it like Jack and the Man in Black's plan in the final episode, with Desmond pulling out the cork. They both wanted that to happen, but both of them wanted it to happen for diametrically opposed reasons. Also, Charlie and Ana Lucia's ghosts and possibly others urged Hurley to go back to the island. And we know that the Man in Black cannot leave the island, so they cannot have been him. So that can't be just merely more of his manipulation either. So that's most likely Jacob, or possibly just the island itself. And that's really something I look for now whenever I rewatch the show, is how much of the supernatural aspects cannot be attributed to the Men in Black. And I think a lot of it can't. The island's healing powers, after all, and the fact that it really did seem to choose Locke in some special way by healing him. Anyway, hope this isn't too long. Love the show and can't wait to hear the rest of the season's recaps. All right, take care. Bye.
Thank you so much for sending this, Michael. I like this interpretation a lot. in part because I like the idea that the Man in Black and Jacob are not the sort of the most powerful forces in this world, you know? Like, I think in a way, the Man in Black and Jacob are subject to the island, capital I, whatever that means. And in a way, they're just doing its will as well. And they're, you know, they're instruments of these larger forces, like kind of in the same way that so many of the characters are and have been that we've talked about. I like this a lot. What do you think, Sammy?
No, I like this a lot also, and I appreciate Michael sort of calling out my comments from last week where I was, you know, attributing everything to the machinations of the Man in Black. And I stand by what I said to the extent of, you know, clearly the literal thing that's happening is the Man in Black is executing a plot, you know, through Richard and through Locke to convince the Oceanic Six that it's their, you know, their destiny to return to the island and fix what went wrong. But I think, you know, Michael is right to point out that, you know, the Man in Black here is, you know, arguably or potentially just even as he pulls off his own manipulations, that he himself is, you know, carrying out the will as a tool of, you know, the will of the island or the will of Jacob is sort of a tool. I think that makes it even cooler to think that, you know, as powerful and manipulative as this guy is, that even he can't, you know, avoid ultimately working towards this, you know, the end that's, you know, being sought by these righteous or just forces, even through his evil. And one other thing this reminds me of is that, you know, I thought it was interesting that Hurley in this week's episode makes the comment that
a lot of people died, Ma. And now this bad stuff is happening because, well, we shouldn't have lied.
which is an interesting comparison to Ben last week telling Jack that bad things happened because they left the island. And that's how we get, you know, the two episode titles. But it's an interesting juxtaposition here where they each are led to believe slightly different versions of the same idea that, you know, it was because you left or it was because you lied, but you need to, you know, ultimately fix these mistakes. And ultimately that's going to involve going back.
Yeah. And I think that is a little bit manipulative. I don't think any of this happened because they left or because they lied. I mean, I think what we saw throughout season 4 in all of the flash forwards was that, like, the seeds for everything that happened were already there, right? Like, we saw the outcome of Kate's trial, which was always going to happen. We saw Jack sort of descend into addiction, which we definitely saw the seeds for that in seasons 1 through 3. Like, not that anything is deserved or whatever, but, like, did the island do it, or did it just, you know? And this is where we get into fate versus free will or whatever. But
yeah, I was just thinking about that. I mean, but I think you're right. I mean, Jack and Kate are good examples. You know, Saeed obviously had lots of demons to deal with. You know, and then Nadia's death was, I mean, a direct result of, you know, either Charles Widmore or Benjamin Linus doing shit, depending on how you interpret it, but not, you know, not of Saeed's doing for leaving or lying or any other transgression. You know, Hurley already felt like he had this cursed life, as we've been discussing, and he kind of feels like he's, you know, gone right back to that, which was a pre-existing thing. Jin died not because they left or because they lied. Jin died there on the island while they were trying to leave by, you know, ultimately by fault of Kimi or Widmore, or however you want to chalk up that blame. So
but just kind of by chance, like.
Yeah. So interesting. So did they bring this upon themselves? Like, no, it doesn't really seem like it.
No, and would it have been easier? You know, would they have been in the dark places they were in if they hadn't been through this experience? Hopefully not, you know, like.
Well, but as you said, some of it, yes. I mean, some of it was, you know, deeper psychological and choices that they had made before going to the island.
Right. But I think Hurley maybe has a point that the lying did make this all more complicated. I mean, I keep thinking back to the episode from season 4 with Kate's trial, when there was that whole conversation about whether Jack was going to testify and whether he was going to back up her story because they had to lie about Aaron being her child, etc. If they hadn't lied, that might have been simpler, but I don't know that it ends with anybody in a different place.
Right. I mean, their lives might have been more complicated in other ways. I mean, they might all be in custody of the U.S. government, and hiding and answering questions all the time. Who knows?
Yeah.
I mean, Widmore might have just killed them right away at that point. I don't know.
Yeah. Such fun options here.
Yeah, it's so hard to tease out the differences between. I mean, like you're saying, it gets back to fate and free will. The choices that they make on the island, the choices that they made before. I mean, at what point do you make a choice that becomes kind of fate because it's so determinative of what comes later? I mean, Kate's decision to murder her stepfather. Since you said that, that's been in my head now. Or Saeed's decision to be a torturer in the Republican Guard, or to accept that life, or maybe he didn't have a choice in that either. But it's interesting to think at what point do the choices you make and how those shape your future become kind of, fate or deterministic in their own way, to the point where it's hard to change them. I think this is something that I want to keep in mind more, that maybe fate and free will aren't quite as distinct
as we might believe.
Anyway. You sound like you've probably had enough of this, so let's move on.
Anyway, thanks, Michael, for that hot take. That led us somewhere deeply existential. Anyway, moving on. Was there anything else from this episode that you wanted to discuss?
Well, let me ask you a question. One thing I was wondering, when Charlotte, asks Dan what's going on with me, and he won't tell her, and she can tell that something's wrong with her, and he knows what it is. Do you think that is it kind of him to spare her until she has to know what's happening, or is it cruel to withhold this information from her?
Two sides of the same coin, I think. On one hand, who wants to hear that, hey, because of the circumstances in which we find ourselves, aka jumping through time, you are probably going to die and there's nothing we can do about it. I mean, I guess the question is she fearing something worse than that? Like, personally, the reason I always like to know right away what's happening is because whatever I make up in my head will be like worse and more dramatic, and like reality is always easier to handle. How do you possibly come up with something that's worse than that?
Right. Worse than you're gonna die from, and there's nothing you can do about it.
Yeah.
Okay, interesting. I was watching it and feeling frustrated with Faraday, like, come on, man, she's dying, tell her. But yeah, I don't know.
Yeah.
I guess what's there to be gained from that? Just to circle back before we get to Damon, to your initial comment about, being kind of thinking that the Miss Hawking introduction at the scene at the end was too much. One, in addition to just loving that sequence, this is kind of a hindsight, I guess. I just thought it was especially cool to watch, like, knowing how great a job they're going to do this year of, like, layering in Eloise Hawking's story, like, over, 3 different periods of time. More than 3 if you count Faraday's flashbacks, just like how we're going to, starting next episode, we're going to get young Eloise on the island, with Widmore, and then we're going to get, sort of middle-aged Eloise, helping with Richard and helping them, bring off the bomb detonation plot and killing her own son, and we're going to get her flashbacks with Faraday, and we're ultimately going to get, like, kind of regretful afterlife Eloise in season 6. Like, yeah. I was just... And the way they brought her back, 2 full seasons, basically, after this character was in 1 episode. She just makes such an impression then that to bring her back now, it's like this fucking reveal, like, oh shit, it's Miss Hawking. And so just, like, being impressed by that and thinking, like, wow, they're just going to do such a good job of telling this person's life story in a creative way over the next, season. I got goosebumps watching it. I was very excited.
I like the gauntlet that she throws to Ben and says, you have a very short window of time. You have 70 hours to get all these people back together. I mean, it sets up what's going to be quite a sequence.
It does. I'm excited about the next few weeks. Should we go to the Damon?
I think we should, yeah. So, of course, as you heard last week, we spoke this season to Damon Lindelof, one of the creators of Lost. In today's section, we're going to talk quite a bit about Sawyer and Juliet and how that relationship developed, plays out on screen, of course, culminating in Juliet's death in the season finale. Damon, you brought up earlier just how much fun it was to return to the Dharma Initiative in its heyday. And that's something I love about season 5 too. It's an absolute blast to see not only Sawyer in that role, but also to get to know Pierre Chang and Radzinski and all these other people. What was that like to write? What was it like to really get into those characters and make them fully realized?
Again, I remember it as being a lot of fun. I mean, like, you know, the excitement of like reaching out to Francois Chow and essentially saying like, look, you know, you basically, you know, you started out as sort of a gag in season 2, and then we had you do a couple more of these instructional movies. But like once we had the idea for Miles and their relationship to one another, we realized that that he would be quite central. That in this, you know, at least as a scientific mind, you know, sort of leading the Dharma Initiative, and sort of seeing him very early in the season for the Faraday payoff, you know, to show that scene of their drilling, and you sort of see the spokes of the donkey wheel, and he's essentially saying, if we can, you know, some version of like, if we can harness this power, you know, we're gonna have mastery over time itself. And this workman's like, yeah, whatever, buddy. Like that part of it was really exciting, because I always loved the idea of, everybody is really the lead in their own show, you know, like there were 50 spin-offs of Lost happening at all, like in Neil Frogert's world, he's on the Neil Frogert show, and Jack and Kate and Sawyer are in that show. And so the idea to sort of like center Francois and say like, oh no, we're not just bringing you to Hawaii for a day this time, and in your lab coat, you're gonna have to move there this year. That was really cool. And then I think just the idea of you know, kind of the Dharma Initiative coming out of the second season was something that people really were excited about, you know, the sort of idea like, who were these hippies that were kind of living on the island. And when we started to get tastes of Ben Linus's childhood there, like doing those episodes was sort of like, okay, we can go much further with this.
Yeah.
And every season, one of the logistical considerations in shooting in Hawaii is that we had to have indoor sets, because the weather, it could rain, you could get rained on for 2 days solid, and we couldn't shut down. And so as we were talking, is like, okay, like that's, we're going to kill two birds with one stone here. And like, sort of like our home sets for season 5 are going to be these barracks, you know, the Dharma barracks, which we've seen in sort of, you know, state of disrepair, but now we kind of get to see them in their heyday.
Yeah, and by the way, I have to admit, I'm wearing my fading Dharma shirt
Nice.
here. So
Your Swan Station.
Sammy alluded to this earlier, but one other thing I think we both love about season 5 is when we're reintroduced to Sawyer after he spent 3 years living in the Dharma Initiative. Of course, he and Juliet have this fully formed, deep relationship. It's not just two people who've just met, where it's sort of a fraught will they won't they relationship, which is what we see earlier in the show. But it's well established, and it's stable, and it's, you know, beloved, I think, by both of us and a lot of the fans. Where did the idea for that come from, and why do you think it worked so well? Of course, building up to the incident where they have this tremendous goodbye moment.
Yeah, I mean, again, there's a certain degree of like 20/20 hindsight as it applies to that. Like here are some of the things that I remember. When we first introduced Juliet, I think that like the idea was, in addition to who she was as a character, you know, playing into the whole sort of like ideas around fertility and the other's obsession with fertility and those issues, like and her being you know, a doctor with an expertise in that. She was also designed to sort of like blow up or turn the love triangle into a love diamond, or because love square just doesn't sound as as exciting. But it's like, okay, so
It sounds square,
Yeah.
but that's yeah.
you know,
yeah.
Kate and Sawyer are going to be in the cages, and Juliet and Jack are going to be over in the Shark Tank, and so she's now going to be in the mix as a potential foil for Jack. You know, so it's going to be like, so now Jack is like, is it going to be Juliet or is it going to be Kate? And Kate's going to be like, is it going to be Jack or is it going to be Sawyer? And then like, but what about Sawyer? Like he's only connecting to Kate. And, you know, although I believe he and Jack had searing chemistry, we never went down that road. So that kind of left Juliet. And like, there were a couple of scenes that Josh and Elizabeth had together. I want to say in season 4, where we were just like, there's something going on here. And then I remember we started to get excited about the idea that they would develop a relationship and that we would just drop it on the audience. Like, we weren't going to show them the flirtation. We were going to show them like, oh, they've been together for 3 years right now. So they're like in love and cohabitating. Like, we're going to skip all of the banter and just cut
and
right
they're just
to
like doing the dishes.
Like he's bringing her a flower. And so, but when we told Josh and Elizabeth about it, they were both like, oh, that doesn't make any sense to us. Like, we don't like, you know, I'm a big fan of yours, you're a big fan of mine, but like, this doesn't feel natural to us. And we were like, I don't know, you know, agree to disagree. And then, you know, and then Mark Goldman did a beautiful job of directing LaFleur. And Josh and Elizabeth just completely and totally committed to it, you know? Like, any doubt that they had just completely and totally evaporated. And, like, as soon as we see them in each other's arms, you just buy it. And so you know, Sawyer and Juliet's relationship actually is much more deeper than any of the other relationships on the show, because, you know, they've been together so long when we meet them. And so, you know, and when we do that 3-year time jump, you know, it's not a time jump like the earlier jumps in season 5, but one where, you know, they have the subjective experience of living in the Dharma Initiative together, and, you know, Sawyer has now become the head of security, and like, and they're sort of like, they're living out their lives without any expectation that this is going to change. Like, they're like, we're just going to live here in the Dharma Initiative until we get purged, I guess. You know, like, that's the way that they're thinking about it. So I don't know. It was like so many things on Lost, you know, we had an instinct. We batted it around in the writer's room. There were arguments for and against it. And then sometimes you were like, let's not do that, and thank God, because it would have been a huge mistake. But most of the time we were like, let's try it, you know? Like, we have to write one of these scripts every fucking 8 days anyway, so, like, what do we have to lose? That one was a biggie. It was sort of like, this can't fail, you know, because we're hinging the entire end game of the season on this relationship between Juliet and Sawyer. And we already sort of had an inkling that Juliet, as someone who was not on Oceanic 815, was probably not going to be moving into the final season of the show. And because Charlie was a death at the end of season 3, that really resonated, because there are certain characters on TV shows that you're not allowed to kill. They're just like too beloved. And it was like, and so people start to go, oh, I know they'll kill him, but they'll never kill her. And like, once they start to feel that way about any character, that's when you have to kill someone that they love, just to remind them that that's the show. Those are what the stakes are. Mm-hmm. And so, knowing that we were probably moving to an end game where Juliet was going to die, you know, in fact, she was going to be. We loved the idea that all these arguments are happening between the men, but it's Juliet who detonates the, you know, Jughead. It felt like a really cool way for her to go out. That would have an much more emotional impact if you said it's not just the audience that is going to feel that loss, but which character on the show is really going to, like, is losing Juliet going to be brutal for? And we couldn't figure out who that was until we put her with Sawyer. So we almost had to make that relationship happen in order to get the emotional juice out of the finale. Especially because Juliet didn't leave the island with the Oceanic Six or have any of those experiences off island.
I mean, just as a fan, I mean, obviously so glad that you ended up going that direction, because when you get to the finale, and no disrespect to any of the other characters, but the reunion between Sawyer and Juliet is by far, to me, the most satisfying moment of that finale in terms of all the reunions. I mean, whatever you did and what the chemistry they had, I mean, it did more than work. I mean, it made the end of the show work.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, and I think that's really a testament to Elizabeth and Josh's work, and again, I love a lot of those moments in the finale. I like the Sun and Jin moment and the Jack and Locke, all those awakening moments where you're like feeling it. But like, there's something about the Apollo bar that is, and I think especially because Juliet has been absent. She's been off screen for almost the entire season. And that's sort of like our first look at her is the revelation that she's David's mom, and Jack was married to her. That was like our homage to, we thought that she might be good with Jack, but we never really followed through with that, etc. So knowing that Juliet and Sawyer get to be soulmates in the forever place just felt incredibly organic. And again, Elizabeth, Josh had been obviously in every single episode of season 6, but Elizabeth just kind of came in and did that work, again, like, Jack Bender directing, Michael Giacchino doing the music, like everything sort of came together in that scene.
You talked about how you had to plan out, well in advance the, Locke's death and how he ended up in the coffin. Obviously, you were talking about that back at the end of season 3 even. Was that a difficult decision to make, to, kill off one of those really, super, super core characters like Locke with basically a year and a half left in the show? Or was it made easy or non-controversial by the fact that you knew you were going to keep Terry O'Quinn around?
I think that's a very simple question in terms of I understand it, but the answer is super duper complicated. And I just want to honor the complication of the question before I answer it in a very simple way, which is like everything basically flowed out of the idea of that at the end of the 3rd season finale in the Hofstraller funeral parlor, that like somebody really important had to be in that box for Jack to be having the reaction that he was having, And at the end of the day, it was sort of like, well, it could be Kate, it could be Sawyer, and it could be Locke. Those are like the 3 people that would have sent Jack spinning to this degree and him having this reaction. And given where his relationship was with Locke in the season 3 finale, as they're sort of facing off at like the radio tower, if it sort of felt like, okay, the thing that's ultimately going to convince Jack to go back to the island is Locke's death. Like, that's the only thing that like makes sense to us. So when it came to considering these other things that you're asking, Sammy, about, Terry O'Quinn is a major character, will we still be able to have him on the show, et cetera, everything like was like kind of flowed out of, okay, it's got to be Locke. We're not going to reveal that it was Locke until the end of the 4th season. We're still seeing the real John Locke in the 5th season, right? Because, the guy who was outside of the station when Ben turns the wheel and then has the interactions with Richard and the compass and Jeremy Bentham, that's John Locke, right? And then, but then the guy who's, who after Ajira returns is not John Locke, and then that payoff of Locke's body was still in the box the entire time. I think that we had figured out a fair amount of that math, and we understood that there was a certain degree of risk taking and having Terry play a character that was just pretending to be John Locke. And I think that the thing that basically gave us some degree of solace and comfort was that we knew in the sideways, in sort of every episode that you see John Locke presented in the sideways in season 6, that's John Locke again. You know, that's Terry playing the actual John Locke. On the island, he's not John Locke. He's the Man in Black. It kind of felt like that was a way for us to sort of have our cake and eat it too. At least, that was our thinking at the time.
No, and frankly, I don't know what Terry knew and when he knew it, but watching season 5 in retrospect, I mean, it certainly feels like when you know what's coming, when he's playing the Man in Black, he feels like a different character. I mean, I don't know what was going on, but Terry just does an amazing job. You know, once you have that reveal, you go back and you think, wow, this feels like the Man in Black the whole time.
Yeah, my recollection is that before the season, we talked to Terry and explained to him that he was going to die in Jeremy Bentham, but he wasn't going to be leaving the show. And he was sort of like, how's that going to work? And we gave him, we're like, when he comes back to the island, he's not really the Locke that left it. But I don't know if we were so specific as to tell him, you are the Man in Black now. But he knew to play it differently.
Since Damon mentioned Mark Goldman, he's been a guest on The Hatch before, and we're actually going to have him back again this season to discuss LaFleur, an episode I love. Super excited to share it with all of you. Yeah,
definitely an episode that kind of screams for, like, let's talk to the director about how he did this. So so that'll be fun. I mean, everything Damon says is gold. I was cracking up when he described Jack and Sawyer as having searing chemistry, and how they should have explored that. That would have been fun. No, but I just thought it was just from a storytelling perspective and understanding how, you know, television, you know, writers and creators structure stories. I just thought it was fascinating to learn that the decision that they were going to kill Locke kind of, you know, stemmed from, you know, introducing a mystery of there's someone in a coffin and it's motivating Jack to want to go back. So the kind of working backward from that, okay, who could be in that coffin that would have this impact on Jack, and realizing that the only legitimate answer to that question was Locke, and thus they were going to have to kill Locke. I just thought that was super interesting to learn about how that came together.
Yeah, and to think about how they arrived at that conclusion. Like, I wonder what the alternatives could have been, you know?
No, I mean, it would have been fascinating to be a fly on the wall in the writer's room for that. And also to be a fly on the wall listening to them debate whether they should really put Sawyer and Juliet together. It was interesting. I mean, interesting that Josh and Elizabeth didn't like that, and that it was so so heavily debated. I mean, it's funny to think about just because it works so well, and they just were so unsure of it. I find that totally fascinating. Yeah,
I mean, Damon says here, you know, they committed to it, and clearly they did, and it clearly works really well. And you even see, like, even in The Lie, which we watched this week, like, Juliet stops to, like, try to put out one of the fires and try to save somebody's life, and Sawyer's like, no, she's dead, and helps her up, and they run away into the jungle together, and, like, you know, we're already leaning this direction. So clearly it was, at least to me it seems clear. I guess I don't really know, but it seems clear that that's where we're going to end up.
Yeah, I mean, it seems possible that by the point that they actually start, you know, writing these episodes and airing them, that they've made that decision already. Yeah. I guess we're not sure about that. Anyway, we'll have a whole lot more from Damon at the end of the season. We got a very lengthy discussion of the incident with him, so we'll have plenty of other guests before then. But make sure you stay tuned for the finale for more from Damon.
Absolutely. Next week, of course, we'll be watching season 5, episode 3, Jughead. It's a Desmond episode. We're going to get a lot more Desmond. We will also have the first part of an interview with Rob Kiker, who was the prop master.
If you've never heard a prop master talk about one of your favorite TV shows before, you really want to listen to this one, because he I mean, the show that we saw on screen really looked the way that it did in a whole lot of cases because of Rob Kiker, and he remembers everything in great detail. And by the way, we mentioned this last week, but for This Place's Death, we're going to have Fionnuala Flanagan on in a couple of weeks talking about Miss Hawking. So, maybe Rosie and I can continue debating whether that character is overdone or not. But Miss Hawking is definitely an interview you're going to want to hear.
I want to clarify my position. I don't think the character is overdone. I just think that an opening shot was a little much.
In the meantime, please rate and review us on Apple Podcasts or Spotify or Stitcher or wherever you're listening to The Hatch. It helps people find the show.
If you would like to call and leave us a hot take, you can do so at 9546-DHARMA. You can also just record a voice memo and message it to our Facebook page or Twitter account.
Yep, and by the way, that's facebook.com/The Hatch Podcast is where you can find us on Facebook. We're on Twitter at The Hatch Podcast as well.
Our theme music is by Andy G. Cohen, and our cover art is by Danny Roth.
And we will be back next week.
Namaste.